I am a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm a history major, a French minor, and a faith, peace, and justice. I chose to write a senior thesis because I wanted an opportunity to really look in depth at an issue that I was interested in. I did some research projects previously and they were smaller, but I really wanted to be able to own a topic and really become an expert on that topic. And I really like working outside of class with a professor on an individual project, so I wanted the opportunity to kind of take my 4 years of history education and use some of my French skills too to create an independent research project. So my thesis is titled Revolutionary Reporting, the Trial of the King, the Patriote Français, and the Fall of the Girondins. So my thesis is set during the time of the French Revolution. It's about the advent of the freedom of press during the French Revolution. And at the beginning of the Revolution, the French people proclaimed in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen that there would be freedom of the press for the first time. So after that happened, a lot of people started newspapers, understandably. And these newspapers are written by all sorts of people, but a lot of times they're written by politicians or people who had a political stance on a certain topic or just wanted a venue to voice their own concerns, opinions, whatever. So I took a look at the press during the French Revolution and kind of how their reporting wasn't necessarily like the reporting that we see today. Kind of what they were saying, what they weren't saying, and I decided to focus during the time of the trial of King Louis XVI. So I looked at one of the newspapers, the Patriote Français, which is written by Jacques-Pierre Brissot during that time, and he was a prominent politician who was serving in the National Convention, which was the legislative body that was trying the king. So I looked at Brissot's newspaper and looked at how it chronicled not only the king's trial, but also really only focused on the Girondin speeches and the Girondin declarations of politics and kind of ignored their enemy political factions. And by doing so, it wasn't actually an objective reporting of the trial of the king, but more so a chronicle of the Girondins' rise to power and then their fall from power shortly after the trial. And my thesis ends with Louis XVI being executed, and shortly after the Girondins purged from the government and Brissot is executed himself about 6 months later. I think my biggest problem in writing my thesis was that all of my primary sources were in French. And I speak French and I read French fine, but I wasn't really counting on the French being written in the 18th century. So it's almost as if you were trying to translate Shakespeare into a different language. So you have to kind of look at the way that they're using certain words and realize that it's not how French is spoken today. And not only that, but then switch it over into idiosyncratic English. So that was definitely a challenge, although I have to say it was really helpful because my advisor, Paul Spagnoli in the history department, he not only is a French historian, but he also speaks and reads French too. So he was really able to help me with my translations also and help me formulate them both into English and into my argument. Most surprising information that I found when I was doing my research and through the course of writing this thesis was, first of all, was the press and how the newspapers were written during the French Revolution. And I think we're really used to picking up a newspaper and it being, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, whatever it might be, and seeing, well, it might not be completely objective. They're more facts-based. When I picked up the newspapers written during the French Revolution, they were completely subjective. Oftentimes during the trial, Brissot would write one thing and he would just leave out huge chunks of information. If one of the rivals gave a great speech, it wouldn't be included at all. Or it would be included and noted that it was a terrible speech, which may or may not actually be the case. So I used a secondary source to double check what was actually happening during the trial at the time, but I found that to be really surprising. Something else that was kind of fun, and part of the reason I picked the French Revolution in the first place is because it's so exciting. As I was going through doing my research, I didn't anticipate it to be such a close chronicle of the actual Girondin fall from power. I kind of thought it would be an interesting way to look at the trial itself, but I didn't realize that only 6 months after he was done writing, Rousseau himself would be guillotined. And I think it's really interesting to see how going into the trial, he was on top of the legislature. He was the most popular guy. He had a really strong following with his paper, and he was very, very popular amongst the other politicians in the legislature. And a little over a year later, he was killed when the rival faction took power during the course of the trial. So I think it's really interesting to see how quickly the politics change. Again, it's something we're not really used to. We have elections, but our government's relatively stable. But in the course of a few months during the revolution, everything could be completely different. I did majority of my research on campus. I was first influenced to study this topic partially through a class I took my junior year, and partially through actually being in Paris during the second semester of my junior year. But when it came down to actual research, I did the most of my research on campus. I used books from O'Neill, and a majority of my works were actually online through the French National Library, so that was really helpful. I was able to do a lot of the research in my room. I think writing a senior thesis is a really valuable tool for the future. I'm going to law school next year, so it was really interesting for me to look at the trial of the king and kind of see even just how judicial procedures were working back then. But I think more importantly, it's really a study in discipline. People who are your roommates or your friends or family members who aren't writing a thesis don't know what the process is like, and the process takes a lot of discipline, because whereas other classes, you have a homework assignment that might be due or a paper that might be due at a certain point. With your thesis, there's no really hard and fast deadlines except for when it's due at the end of the year. So it's really upon yourself to take the time to write when you don't want to, go to the library when your friends aren't going to the library, and be disciplined enough to do so over the course of an entire year. And I think that's a life lesson that's going to be really important for work or future graduate school or anything for people to learn. Also, taking ownership of your own work, I think, is really important too, to realize that nobody's making you write about this, and you really should be proud of what you're doing. So I think both good life lessons. Okay, so final words for anyone considering writing a thesis. A few things. First is start early. Everyone's going to tell you to start early, but it's hard. Life gets in the way. I know I'm going to law school next year, so a big chunk of my fall semester was spent studying for the LSAT exam. And I know a lot of other people will be studying for things like the MCAT or the GRE or the GMAT or whatever it might be, job applications, volunteer applications. But if you put your thesis off and do all those things, which are important and may seem more important at the time, then you're going to be really sad when it comes to the spring and you still have to write most of your thesis. So that's tip number one. And tip number two is to just find a buddy or someone else who's writing a thesis. You're all members of the honors program, so I'm sure you have friends that are writing a thesis too. It's hard for people who aren't writing a thesis to understand kind of the volume of what it is and the magnitude of what it is and how important it is for you. And your roommates who aren't writing one, they might just never understand. And if you have a friend or somebody you can go to the library with or share when you find, a good resource, or you get a chapter done, or just to kind of be with you through like the tough nights you don't want to be in BAPST, and then also to celebrate with you when you're done. I think that's really important. And it was really important for me. And one of my good friends, she was writing a thesis in philosophy, so we didn't even really share on topics, but we definitely would share it in the process together. And I think to have that support system is great. Also, the honors program is a great support system for you, so you definitely will have friends from the honors program that are going to be doing this too. So enjoy, good luck, and trust me, it's over. At some point you will finish and you will be very proud of your work.
things are gonna change, and not for better. Don't know what it means to me.